The wheels of the casket cart clicked faintly against the polished tile of Terminal B. Staff Sergeant Elijah Cross, wearing the deep blue of the Army Honor Guard, walked beside the flag-draped coffin with reverent precision. Every medal on his chest had been earned under fire, but in this moment, his focus was singular. Deliver Private Rodriguez home with dignity. Excuse me, sir, a voice interrupted. Cold. Disinterested. You cannot be back here without proper clearance. Elijah stopped. A white man in a security badge and wrinkled blazer stood in front of the restricted gate. Nathan Griggs, airport terminal manager. He barely looked up from his clipboard. Elijah calmly extended the official escort documentation. I'm Staff Sergeant Cross, United States Army. I'm accompanying a fallen soldier to his family. Griggs glanced at the papers, unimpressed. This doesn't mean you can bypass procedure. Rules are rules, soldier. The word soldier left his mouth with an audible edge. A few nearby passengers turned their heads. I'm not requesting an exception, Elijah said evenly. This is protocol. You can call your supervisor. Griggs folded his arms. You think the uniform gives you special treatment? This isn't Arlington. This is an airport. Behind Elijah, airline staff were holding position in silent respect. A ramp agent lowered his cap. A woman near the windows stood and placed her hand over her heart. Griggs didn't notice or didn't care. I'm asking one last time, Elijah said, voice measured. Step aside, sir. The family is waiting. Griggs chuckled. Family can wait like everyone else. You're holding up foot traffic. A tense silence settled over the terminal. Even the gate agent's typing had stopped. Elijah looked down at the casket, then slowly up at Griggs. He did not raise his voice. He did not step forward. But something in his stillness made the air feel heavier. You're not just blocking me, Elijah said. You're blocking Private Rodriguez and the men who carried him out of that valley. Griggs waved a dismissive hand. That's not my concern. Then came a sound, soft but unmistakable. A passenger had raised their phone. Recording. Another followed. Someone whispered, Is this really happening? Elijah turned slightly, not toward the cameras, toward the coffin, because this was not about him. This was about how a system treats its heroes when no one is supposed to be watching. Elijah Cross had not always worn the ceremonial blues of the Honor Guard. There was a time, not long ago, when his uniform was streaked with desert dust, blood, and salt from sweat. As a combat medic in Afghanistan, he had crawled through shrapnel storms to save others. He had carried wounded soldiers on his back under fire. He had learned to keep steady hands even when the world around him was burning, but he never expected that the hardest battle he would face would come in a quiet airport terminal in his own country. After returning stateside, Elijah had volunteered for the National Cemetery Honor Guard, not because it was easy, but because it mattered. He believed that every soldier deserved to be remembered with dignity, that no one should die for their country only to be forgotten at baggage claim. But America had a way of showing selective memory. At another airport, months before, he had stood quietly beside another coffin when a junior manager glanced at his uniform and laughed. You guys always this dramatic? Elijah hadn't responded. He never did. But he had written it down. And that was the part no one saw. Behind the calm eyes and perfect posture, Elijah had become a student of injustice. Every sideways comment, every policy exception, every refusal to extend even basic courtesy. He kept a private log, time, date, name, behavior. Not because he was looking for trouble, but because trouble kept looking for him. And time after time, it had a badge and a clipboard. Nathan Griggs wasn't new to him. There had been whispers. Veterans nudged off flights for asking about pre-boarding. Honor Guard members told to wait outside security. Even Gold Star families turned away from viewing windows. Griggs called it policy. The others called it disrespect in a suit. Elijah had filed quiet complaints, but nothing ever came of them. Griggs had connections, and the airport board seemed more concerned with public image than public integrity. It's just how it is, they told him. Try not to make it personal. But how could he not? Private Rodriguez hadn't just been a name on a manifest. He had served under Elijah's watch. A wide-eyed 19-year-old who called him Doc and asked him once if it was okay to be scared before a night op. Elijah had patched him up twice in the field. He couldn't patch him up a third time. That coffin behind him was not just protocol. It was a promise to Rodriguez's mother, to every soldier's memory, and to himself. He would not let it be insulted. Not again. Not today. But still, Elijah did not raise his voice that he never had, because he had learned something in combat that most men like Griggs would never understand. Power does not always shout. Sometimes it records, sometimes it waits, and sometimes it lets arrogance walk right into the trap that is. Oh, when Griggs tried to embarrass him in front of that gate, Elijah didn't flinch. He had seen bullets fly. He had held dying men's hands. A petty airport manager's ego didn't shake him, but it still hurt. Not for himself, for what it meant, for what it revealed, that after everything, after war, after loss, after sacrifice, a decorated soldier could still be reduced to a nuisance by someone who had never worn the uniform. Oh, Elijah stood straight, silent, but not unarmed, because this time, he was ready, and he had receipts. The atmosphere inside Terminal C had begun to shift, but not because of anything Elijah said. He still stood silent, unmoved, beside the flag-draped coffin. But someone else had noticed. Colonel Evelyn Hart had just disembarked from a flight across the concourse when she spotted the commotion. A woman of steel presence. She had seen enough disrespect wrapped in formality over the years to recognize it from a distance. She walked briskly across the terminal, her army dress uniform crisp, her boots clicking like punctuation marks on polished tile. She didn't hesitate. "Excuse me," she said, stepping between Griggs and Elijah. "What exactly is going on here?" Griggs turned with a smirk already forming. "Ma'am, this doesn't concern you. Just a little confusion about policy. We're handling it." Colonel Hart's brow didn't move. Handling it how? By detaining an honor guard escort and blocking a military procession. Griggs tried the charm tactic next. "We have rules, ma'am. We treat everyone equally here. Military or not. They can't just walk through terminals with theatrics." That was the word that did it. Theatrics. Hart repeated slowly, as if tasting something bitter. "Is that how you describe escorting a fallen soldier home?" Griggs laughed nervously. "It's just tradition, ma'am. Symbolic stuff. Let's not blow this out of proportion." Elijah didn't speak. He didn't have to. He glanced, just briefly, at a security camera mounted near the ceiling, and then, with deliberate calm, he pulled out his phone and tapped the screen once. "Griggs noticed. What are you doing now? You think filming me is going to help your case?" Elijah still said nothing. Just one phrase, quiet but heavy. "That's one more for the record." Griggs scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. "You people and your conspiracies. Nobody cares about your little notes." Colonel Hart's gaze sharpened. "Who exactly do you mean by you people, Mr. Griggs?" He opened his mouth, closed it. Something had shifted in the air. Asterisk. Passengers nearby began to take notice. Phones were lifted. Cameras angled. A quiet buzz spread through the terminal. Not of chaos, but attention. Elijah's posture hadn't changed, but something about him now felt prepared, as if every insult was just another puzzle piece falling into place. Colonel Hart turned to him. "Sergeant, do you have clearance and orders for this escort?" Elijah nodded once. "Yes, ma'am. Department of Defense authorization. The family is waiting at the cemetery. And this man," she motioned to Griggs, "is preventing the escort from proceeding." "Yes, ma'am." Griggs interjected quickly. "I said we're clarifying." He refused to wait for full security protocol. But Colonel Hart had stopped listening to him. She stepped forward, looking Griggs directly in the eyes. "Let me make one thing very clear. If you are actively obstructing a DoD-approved honor guard mission, that is not just rude. That is federal interference." Elijah remained expressionless, but behind that stillness, the reversal had begun. He was not just enduring Griggs' humiliation. He was cataloging it. And though no one in the terminal knew it yet, the man standing in silence beside a coffin was far more prepared than anyone suspected. The terminal was no longer just a waiting area. It had become a stage. And Griggs was beginning to realize he was not the one holding the script. Elijah's silence had never been weakness. It had been precision, patience, preparation. Now, it was time. His phone buzzed once. A familiar number. Elijah answered and held it out, his thumb tapping the speaker icon. A clear, commanding voice filled the space. "Sergeant Cross, this is Colonel Dennings at Defense Command. We have received multiple reports about your situation. Please confirm, are you currently being prevented from completing your honor guard duty?" Griggs froze mid-step. "Yes, sir. Elijah answered calmly. I am being obstructed by airport management. Colonel Dennings did not miss a beat. Understood. Military transport is en route. You are to remain in uniform and maintain position. A federal oversight team has been alerted. Sergeant, you are not alone. A ripple went through the crowd. Passengers were no longer pretending not to watch. Cameras were lifted without shame. Eyes locked on Elijah, not as an object of pity, but as a man taking control of the moment. Griggs forced a laugh. Oh, come on. This is getting out of hand. What? Are we broadcasting this now? Elijah turned his screen outward for all to see. TikTok, 61.4K live viewers. Facebook, 32,000 and rising. YouTube, mirrored stream. Audio clear. Video sharp. Captions. Auto-transcribing every single word. Griggs' face drained of color as his own voice echoed from the screen. This uniform doesn't mean anything in here. You think tradition gives you special access? The words hung in the air like smoke, impossible to contain once released. Colonel Hart, standing tall beside Elijah, slowly raised her own phone. Mr. Griggs, she said coldly, you might want to know that hashtag honor the uniform is now trending. Number 4 nationally. And rising. Griggs turned slowly, as if hoping someone, anyone, might still be on his side. But the airport staff had stepped back. TSA agents looked away. A janitor had stopped mopping and simply stood with arms folded, eyes narrowed. Even the airline representative, who had been silent behind the desk, discreetly slid her name tag off and disappeared into a back hallway. Griggs sputtered. This is out of context. Elijah did not raise his voice. He did not need to. You wrote the context, he said simply. I just recorded it. And suddenly, the terminal felt different, the background noise of boarding calls and rolling. Suitcases seemed to fade, replaced by something far more profound, awareness. Colonel Hart stepped forward. Mr. Griggs, obstruction of a federal military operation is not just unethical. It's unlawful. Griggs flinched. This is my terminal. I know, she said, cutting him off. This terminal belongs to the public. And the public is watching. Elijah didn't smile, but he did raise his eyes, just once, to meet Griggs. And that small movement spoke louder than any threat that IT said. You tried to embarrass me. You tried to diminish my uniform. You thought silence meant submission. You were wrong. Griggs' phone lit up in his hand. Notifications piled in. News alerts. Messages from higher-ups. A call from the regional director he ignored once. His fingers trembled as he fumbled to silence it. Too late. The reversal was no longer coming. IT had already begun. Just when it seemed the tension in the terminal could not rise any higher. The doors opened. Not quietly. Not unnoticed. This was not some backdoor briefing or behind-the-scenes apology. This was intentional. The uniformed procession stepped into terminal seat. First came the brass. 3 generals in full dress, their ribbons like medals of thunder. Then 2 colonels, and beside them, a woman whose very presence silenced the room. The Secretary of Veterans Affairs. Cameras snapped. Passengers gasped. The procession parted, and from the center stepped Senator Caroline Holt, the senior representative from Elijah's home state. She wore no uniform, but her presence demanded the same respect. She walked directly toward Elijah. I saw the live stream, she said simply. I watched everything. Griggs took a step back. No, this isn't what it looks like. He stammered. This whole thing's been twisted. But no one was listening to him anymore. From the crowd, another man stepped forward. Middle-aged, shaved head, unassuming in jeans and a windbreaker. Until he opened his coat to reveal a service patch. Marine Corps, retired. He nodded at Elijah. I served with your fallen son. Then another voice. Lieutenant Colonel Barnes. Army Reserves. A third. Coast Guard. Honor Guard Command. Retired. It was like a dam breaking. Passengers who had seemed like regular civilians began stepping forward one by one, each of them military. Quiet, calm, and now unmistakably proud. Griggs looked around, spinning, sweating. It was as if the very terminal he claimed to control had been quietly populated by people whose sacrifices built the ground he stood on. And then, her voice. Elijah? Hey. Woman stepped forward. Simple black dress. Trembling hands. She was holding a folded flag against her chest like it was part of her body. Elijah turned to her. His face, so composed for hours, shifted. Just slightly. just enough that he stepped toward her and gently took her hand. "Everyone," Elijah said, finally addressing the crowd. "This is Maria Santos, mother of Private First Class Gabriel Santos, the soldier I'm here to escort." The room went still. Mrs. Santos held the folded flag tighter, her voice breaking as she spoke. "My son was 21. He always wanted to be a medic, like Sergeant Cross. Said he wanted to serve and protect. Said the uniform meant something." She looked at Griggs, tears streaking her face. "And today, I watched a man in a tie try to tell my son's escort that his sacrifice was theater." Even the strongest in the room had to look down. Senator Holt approached and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You raised a hero, Mrs. Santos. And today, he helped expose something many tried to ignore." Elijah gave a single, sharp salute, then turned back to Griggs. "Mr. Griggs," came a stern voice from behind him. "It was the director of airport operations." He was flanked by two men in dark suits and earpieces. "Effective immediately. You're to follow us to the administrative office. Bring your badge. Security will escort you from the premises once your clearance is revoked." Griggs opened his mouth, but nothing came out. There were no words left, only the sound of shutters clicking, phones buzzing, and a hashtag honor the uniform. Now, trending #2 worldwide. Elijah returned to position beside the coffin. And this time, when the honor guard began to move, the terminal was silent. Passengers stood. Some saluted. Others placed hands over hearts. Even children looked on in stillness. Sensing the weight of the moment, as the casket passed, Maria Santos walked beside it, her fingers trailing its polished surface. She wasn't alone. She was surrounded by soldiers, retired, active, decorated, unknown, all of them bearing witness. Griggs' exit happened quietly. In the background, N01 followed him. N01 clapped. N01 offered him a second chance. Because some moments are not about apologies, they're about consequences. And in that terminal, justice didn't arrive with a gavel. It arrived with uniforms. Unity and truth. By morning, the video had already exploded across the country. Every news channel, every social media feed. There it was. Griggs, red-faced and rattled, denying a decorated soldier the right to honor the dead. And then, just hours later, being escorted out of the terminal like a man whose time had run out. The backlash was instant and unforgiving. The airport issued a statement by midday. "Mr. Griggs has been terminated effective immediately. His actions do not reflect the values of our organization." But the damage had already been done. Airline executives were furious. Veterans associations demanded formal apologies. Protesters showed up at the terminal carrying signs that read, "Respect is not optional," and "Honor the uniform." Then came the final blow from someone Griggs never expected. His wife, a retired Marine who had once stood in combat zones without flinching, released a statement of her own. "The man in that video is not the man I married. I took an oath to serve with honor. He chose mockery and arrogance. I am filing for divorce." With one broadcasted moment, Griggs lost everything: his position, his marriage, and his reputation. A man who barked orders had been silenced by truth, but while one life unraveled, another began to rise. Elijah Cross was invited to speak at the National Military Honors Summit. Dignitaries stood when he walked in. Senators shook his hand. And, standing in the front row was Maria Santos, her eyes wet with pride. He did not gloat. He did not mention Griggs by name. Instead, Elijah introduced something bigger than himself. The Cross Standard. A documentation protocol designed to protect military personnel from public humiliation and systemic disrespect. Built from years of quiet suffering and careful note-taking. It was a blueprint for justice, through preparation, not outrage. Within a month, 6 airports had adopted the protocol. Within 3 months, it was cited in congressional hearings. Veterans across the country began using it to file complaints, supported by ironclad evidence and a clear chain of command. Letters started arriving from soldiers, from widows, from teenagers whose parents had served and been ignored. Point 1 read, "You made people listen. Not with rage, but with reason. Thank you." But the one Elijah kept framed on his desk came from Maria Santos. Gabriel believed one man could make a difference. He was right. And perhaps he was, because Elijah had not only honored a fallen soldier, He had transformed an entire system. Airports began mandatory dignity training. Supervisors were retrained. And above every terminal where the cross standard was implemented, a new plaque was installed. Dignity is not negotiable. Respect is not begged for. Griggs had tried to belittle a man doing his duty. Instead, he'd elevated him. And in doing so, he became the cautionary tale, while Elijah became the national voice for those who served in silence. The ripple had become a wave, and America, this time, was watching. The airport was quieter now. Months had passed, but the ripple remained. Elijah Cross stood at the far end of the terminal, not in protest, not in uniformed defiance, but in quiet readiness. He was no longer just a cemetery guard. He was a teacher, a guide, a standard bearer. Each week, he trained a new class of honor guards, men and women who would carry both flag and memory. He taught them not just formation and posture, but pride. "You are not decorations," he often said. "You are the last line of respect." On his desk was a photo he never moved. It showed him and Maria Santos standing beside Private Gabriel's casket. Behind them, hundreds of civilians stood in silence, heads bowed. Beneath the photo, etched in steel, was the plaque, "Respect is not a courtesy, it is a duty." One day, during a televised interview, a reporter asked Elijah what justice meant to him now that he paused, thoughtful, eyes steady. "I did not go viral to humiliate a man," he said quietly. "I went viral so that no soldier, living or fallen, ever feels humiliated again." That quote would be printed in newspapers, echoed in speeches, shared in classrooms. But for Elijah, it was never about headlines. It was about ensuring what happened that day would never happen again. At the far end of the terminal, a new military family had arrived. A young woman held her child close, eyes heavy with grief. As her husband's flag-draped coffin was wheeled toward them, Elijah approached slowly. No cameras, no applause, just honor. He stood tall, crisp, and still. And then he saluted. The screen faded, not to black, but to quiet light. A story ended not with anger, but with a promise that as long as Elijah Cross stood, no uniform would go unseen. No sacrifice would go unacknowledged, and dignity, true, unwavering dignity, would never again be negotiable.